Hi, Lisa Marie Kosas of Global One Health. In this video, I want to talk about the 90-90 hip switch, which is just the development from the 90-90 hip stretch in the previous video. So I'm going to actually start the 90-90 hip switch from this position instead of from one specific side. So I'm going to have my legs bent, feet flat on the ground. For now, we're going to do the modified version where I have my arms down on the ground for support, but I'll show you another variation that you can do. So once you've I do recommend working on the 90-90 hip stretch first, which is this position, right? So that you can let your muscles kind of adapt to that position, work on that flexibility in the soft tissue and the mobility in the joint structure. To me, I think of transitioning from one side to the other is a little bit more complicated or more of a progression. So I do recommend spend time in the 90-90 stretch first and then work on transitioning from one side to the other. So I start my 90-90 hip stretch with both legs bent in my centered position. And then I'm going to simply choose one side to move into, and then I'm going to rotate, and I'm already automatically in this 90-90 hip stretch. So when I'm switching, I'm not going to spend as much time in the position. Maybe I spend 3 to 5 or even up to 10 seconds if I want to spend a little bit more time in each stretch. But I want to focus more on the transition between the two. So if I'm doing it at the beginning of a workout, as part of my warm-up, I'm not going to sit in the static stretch. I might save that for post-workout or on my recovery days. But when I'm doing it beginning of a workout, I like to do the hip switch so that I'm kind of just actively moving my muscle tissue in and out of each position. So I'll probably hold for 3 to 5 or 6 seconds. Now from here, I'm simply going to transition to the other side. So the back leg, as I mentioned, is internal rotation. The front leg is an external rotation. So what I want to do is raise up that knee of the back leg, and I keep raising it up until my pelvis starts to move in that same direction. And I'm going to reach that hip downward, pass through the center position, and now I'm going to rotate completely around so I'm in the opposite side, same position on the opposite side. So at a quick glance, this is what it's going to look like, almost like a windshield wiper movement, back and forth. But to break down the transition again, so the back leg, I'm going to push down in through the foot, and I raise the knee. I want it to be nice and smooth. And as I continue raising the knee, now the amount of height or range that I have to lift the knee up before my pelvis moves is strictly going to be determined by how much mobility and flexibility I have in the joint structure, right? So I'm going to raise up the knee, and then when I need to allow the hip to come up, I let the hip come up in a natural pattern. I pass through, and now I'm looking to take this top hip and drive it through and forward. So now I'm pressing down through there, through that inside of that knee. Again, on this side, I raise the knee until the hip comes up. Let me start from a different angle here for you to see a different perspective. So I'm going to raise up the knee. My hip will follow suit. I transition my arm around. Now I'm bringing the other hip forward and through. So as I mentioned, if you have trouble just getting into this position and sitting comfortably, or as I talk about in the 90-90 stretch video, if when you sit down that you can't stay centered in the frame of your pelvic alignment, meaning if the body naturally is out here because you just don't have the mobility in the hip structure to stay centered, you want to use your arms for support in the stretch. You would do the same thing here in the switch transition, right? So I'm going to have my arms down so that arm away from the camera is into the ground. So as I raise up the knee, let the hip follow through, transition my legs across, I already set up my arms to provide that support. Right, so from a different angle, I get that arm down. So as I complete the transition, that arm is already there to help me stay centered so I don't transition and fall out of alignment. Now, if you have a nice mobility in the structures, and you want to keep, of course, the core tight because that's what's enabling you. And notice you're going to be on that angle to start. We talk about that in that deepening that stretch for that external rotator stretch in the front hip. I'm slightly leaned forward. And then as I go into that internal rotation stretch, remember I talked about how you want to just kind of start to rotate towards the back leg. So you're in essence following through and allowing the movement to continue to take you to the other side. If you feel that you want to make it more challenging, you want to have the core strength to be able to sit up nice and tall and maintain a neutral spine, but another variation certainly is to have the arms out to the sides, and then you work on that rotation, you drop the hip down, So that is another variation that you can do in the 90-90 hip stretch if you have the ability to keep the muscles of the core structure engaged and have the integrity to maintain that position in the trunk and then still do your transition without needing that support. So certainly that is another slightly more advanced or modification or progression that you can do. Either one is fine, but the goal is keeping the integrity through the structure by maintaining core activation to keep the spine neutral and using, right, so there's also just one other footnote. I want to use my glutes. So as I transition through, I might use my glute, right, activation from this point to get me through, right? I'm using my glutes to open up, because remember what I'm doing is if I'm hip flexion here of my back leg and internal rotation, my glute activation is going to help open up, right, that front anterior hip structure complex so that I'm getting the glute activation. So of course you still want, even though you're on the ground, it's not passive, meaning that there's no activation in the structures, right? You still want muscle activation to initiate the movement through the hip structure. So please do be mindful of keeping the glutes engaged, the core engaged. If you have the arms out to the sides, you can certainly think of like an isometric downward press of the arms to get activation of your lat muscles. You always want to be moving with mindfulness and with integrity to keep you safe. But that is how you transition from one side to the other to take the 90-90 stretch into the 90-90 hip switch.